Greetings. This is Michael Erlewine, and I want to tell you something about how I met Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche in 1974. Recently, somebody commented on the image of the Tibetan dragon that I posted in yesterday's blog, so I'll post it here as well. So I thought I might tell the story of how I learned about that image from the Venerable Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I originally received that image on a large woodblock print that came in a set from Tibet. In fact, it's on my wall to the left of me right now, about 4 feet by 3 feet in size. It's a beautiful work. And so I will share this image with the story of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind toward the Dharma, also called the 4 reversals. I learned about this when I met the great Lama Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and he first pointed out the 4 thoughts to me. Trungpa Rinpoche founded Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado, and is credited with introducing thousands of students, including myself, to Buddhism as a path rather than just a bit of Asian philosophy. I was into Zen Buddhism before I met Trungpa, but it was mostly intellectual, something that, I grew up in the late 1950s and early 1960s with Buddhism. It's one of the topics, along with existentialism and things like that. It was sometimes talked and savored late at night, along with plenty of caffeine, usually instant coffee and powdered creamer, and we smoked a lot of cigarettes. By the early 1970s, it became clear that Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhism in particular, held something special for me. I had been reading the early books of Chögyam Trungpa, at first stunned by the incredible art on the covers that he designed, and later by the content itself. Sometime, probably late in 1973, I was thrilled to see a notice posted around the University of Michigan campus that Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche himself was coming to speak here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And that was February of 1974. And so I wanted to meet him in person, very much. And I called the group. There was a little phone number posted on this. These are just little mimeographed posters. I called the group that were putting on his talk to find more details, and I found that they were really short-handed. And so I ended up as Trungpa Rinpoche's chauffeur for the weekend. Plus, I designed the poster for the event. I couldn't wait to go, and I got to pick him up at the airport. And I had to drive out with an old beat-up Ford station wagon, a kind of station wagon that when you got out and took the key out and walked away, it chugged away for about 30, 40 seconds before the engine would just die and turn off. Anyway, in my whole beat-up Ford station wagon, I waited breathlessly at the airport for him to deplane. This is back in the days when you could go right up to the gate. People poured out, but no Tibetans. Now, I knew he was traveling with Larry Mermelstein, who later headed up the Nalanda Translation Committee. And finally, there he came. There was Trungpa standing before me and looking directly at me. I was really close to him. I could see that his eyes looked very tired, and somehow the whites of his eyes were all yellow. Then Trungpa rolled his eyeballs upward toward the top of his head until I could barely see the pupils. I couldn't see him. And when they came back down, all the tiredness and yellowness was gone, just like that. And there I stood, staring into the eyes of perhaps the wildest human being I had ever encountered. It was an incredible moment. Suddenly there he was. Wow. No disappointment. Anyway, I drove Trungpa and Mermelstein back to the professor's house where they were to stay on the University of Michigan, and I carried in Rinpoche's luggage. A group of people were already there waiting for him. My job for the moment was done, but instead of leaving, I kind of just hung around the edges of the room, hoping to get some more clues as to what this incredible man, this being, was all about. I was afraid I might just be kicked out, but very soon the whole group of them were leaving for a tour of the University of Michigan campus. I, of course, was not invited, so I prepared to leave too. At the last moment, Trungpa decided that he's not going with them, but he would stay by himself at the house and get some rest. And everyone was filing out, and I stood to the side waiting until they got out. One by one they came past me. And then, to my astonishment, as I prepared to leave, Trungpa Rinpoche looked directly at me and beckoned me to stay with him. I was only too eager, and he led me into a small library office room, must have been the professor's office, and he sat me down on a wooden chair. Now this was beyond my wildest fantasies, and there I sat, not knowing just how to behave. I just sat there. Next, Trungpa opened a small bottle of sake, drank some, and proceeded to inspect just about every item, every knick-knack in the room. And he was very animated, lifting up each memento from its shelf, sometimes holding things up to the light and peering through them, and so on. He did a pretty complete inventory of whatever was in that room, and all this time I sat there afraid to move, taking this all in. Trungpa was very animated. And then before I knew it, he was inspecting me, and for the next hour or whatever, Trungpa proceeded to instruct me in basic meditation and related topics, but he never called it that. He didn't call it anything. He simply taught me how to watch my own breath, watching the breath go out and watching the breath come in again. And he very carefully monitored what I was doing. And particularly he was concerned with my out-breath, how I breathed out. It seemed to him I was not getting it to go out far enough for him. Needless to say, I was nervous being on the spot. At one point he said, "Michael, let your breath go all the way out." All the way. And as I struggled to relax and let this happen, he remarked, "Don't worry, it will come back." And as he said this, it was not as simple as just following his directions. A lot of deep internal stuff was happening at the same time that he was speaking to me. And as I breathed out, my whole lifelong fear of letting go, of dying and death, flashed before my mind, just like one of those stories in the movies or something. I struggled to suppress it for a moment and then finally just let go. And as the breath went out, my lifelong fear vanished. Perhaps this moment marked the beginning of my actual Dharma practice and the end of Buddhism as something to think about, and the dawning realization that Dharma was a path and a method, not just a philosophy, not something to talk about. And so it went. It was only much later that I understand that Trungpa Rinpoche was teaching me basic meditation, what's called shamatha. And at the time it seemed like my whole life was changing around me as he spoke. And later, as I was getting ready to leave and we walked down the hall together toward the front door, we came upon the poster I had designed for his public talk hanging on the wall. It was an image of an Asian dragon, the one I talked about earlier, flying in the clouds. I enclose it here. And for those of you who don't know the Oriental dragon, it's a far cry from the Western idea of medieval dragons, that breathe fire and knights in armor fought. In the East, the dragon is a heroic figure, one of the most abiding signs of good fortune. As we walked down the hall, Trungpa pointed at the poster and asked me if I knew what this image represented.